Hello guys, today we'll discuss about book which is about learning. So let's start with an uncomfortable truth. The book quietly demolishes. So the book name for the context How People Learn, Brain, Mind, Experience and School by the National Research Council. So the most education systems like schools, universities, corporate trainings, online courses is still built on medieval fantasy that the human brain is an empty bucket. Pour facts in, test what leaks out, punish the leaks. And then everyone acts surprised when people forget everything 2 weeks later. The entire book exists to say this model is wrong, not so-called efficient, not like quote-unquote suboptimal, wrong at the level of how the brain actually works. The authors don't shout, they don't posture, they just calmly bring 40 years of cognitive science and say, here's what learning really looks like, deal with it. Learning is not absorption, it is construction. And yes, that ruins a lot of syllabi. People do not receive knowledge. They build it using whatever messy junk is already in their heads. This is the first pillar of the book, and it's one of the most people hate because it kills fantasy of control. Every learner walks into the room with prior beliefs, half understood models, wrong explanations that feels right, and mental shortcuts that worked once and now won't die. And the brain refuses to ignore them. You can explain gravity perfectly, like Newton equations, diagrams, and the learner will still secretly believe that heavier objects fall faster because that belief already lives rent-free in their head. The book's favorite metaphor is brutal but accurate. New knowledge doesn't overwrite old knowledge. It gets interpreted through it. And that's why kids think the earth is a pancake inside a sphere. That's why adults memorize formulas and still reason like amateurs. And that's why people pass exam and fail reality. And if you don't surface what people already think, you are teaching into a black hole. And you gotta understand that memorization is not understanding, and experts prove it. Because basically, you're just repeating the same shit without going deeply what this is all about. And here's a quiet slap to the face. Experts are not smarter because they memorize, they're smarter because their knowledge is organized differently. The book leans heavily on research comparing novices and experts, chess players, physicists, historians, doctors. Novices, I hope I pronounced this shit correctly, see isolated facts, focus on surface features, get overloaded quickly. And you can ask, what about experts? But experts see the deep patterns, chunk information, know what doesn't matter. And here's the kicker. Experts do not necessarily remember more, they remember better. they store knowledge around principles, not trivia. And medical students, for example, memorize symptoms. A doctor sees systems failing. A student memorizes historical dates. A historian sees causal structure and incentives. Same information, completely different mental architecture. And what it means, if your teaching produces people who can repeat like a facts but can't reason like why it's happened, what was behind it, just like fucking dates and that's it, you didn't create knowledge, you created storage errors. In other words, it is like being like a USB drive, I guess, instead of like thinking deeply, processing. Transfer is the real test, and most learning fails it. And this is one of the most valuable parts of the book, and it gets ignored constantly. Learning that only works in one context is fragile. If someone, for example, solves problems only in class, remembers only during exams, understands only when questions look familiar, then learning did not happen, pattern matching happened. The book uses a simple but devastating example. In other words, it teaches you to be anti-fragile, to learn some like universal concepts no matter what situation you got. Students who practice throw darts underwater, it's like example, or another like two groups, one practiced mechanically, the other learned the principle of light refraction. Then the situation changed slightly. The mechanical group collapsed. The principal group adapted instantly. That's transfer. And understanding lets you move knowledge, not just recall it. And here's the ugly implication. If you don't teach why, you're training people for a world that no longer exists the moment conditions change. In other words, when we understand why, like, for example, something happening, what is like mechanics behind it, we that person do not getting deep knowledge. Because when you understand like inside technicalities, mechanics, even though the context change, they able to adapt because they see what exactly changed it. In other words, they can see the pattern, which explains a lot of like a modern frustration with like a graduates, employees, and certified specialists. The brain is not passive; it is aggressively opinionated. In other words, it's biased, and instead of like critical thinking and looking to the situation from the different angles, our brain most of the time lazy motherfucker and just want to have like a black and white thinking. Another myth the book buries gently but permanently, that learners are not neutral observers. They're not. Humans theory generating machines, even children, or you can say like prediction machines, because that predictions give to our brain, to us, sense of comfort. And that's another reason why, for example, people got stressful, because they are like an engine machine, aka brain, constantly predicting just like a negative thing. And of course you will have like a stress and that kind of thing. So kids invent explanations before they learn correct ones. Adults do the same, they just more confident about it. In other words, the more like older you are, it's gonna be harder for you to adapt to the new environment because you getting attached to the previous experience. And especially I guess you definitely know that kind of old motherfuckers who like all the time recalling how was like something back then. And the truth is that reality changing constantly, and instead of complaining you just have to learn to adapt. So the brain hates uncertainty, so it fills gaps fast, sometimes incorrectly, but convincingly, because the brain main like goal objective keep your ass safe, even though like by lying to yourself. That's why simply so-called telling people things often fails. Lectures not useless, the book is clear about that, but lectures work only after learners have like a struggled enough to know what they're missing. Explanation before struggle feels like noise. Explanation after struggle feels like insight. Timing matters more than brilliance. Metacognition, the skill nobody teaches but everyone needs. If there's one concept in this book that quietly separates amateurs from like a professionals, it is metacognition. Thinking about your thinking, not philosophically but practically. Like instead of like acting on like an autopilot and just accepting whatever shit comes to your mind, you assessing like, does it make sense to think about it or do this or not? And experts constantly ask themselves, do I actually understand this? What am I missing? Where could this break? What would disprove my idea? Novices don't, not because they're lazy, but because no one taught them to. And the book is blunt here. Self-monitoring is learnable. In other words, again, when you analyzing, like self-reflecting to your own ideas, to your own feeling, you can teach people too. Notice confusion early, test understanding, adjust strategies, allocate effort intelligently. And when you do, learning accelerates and transfers. And this is why the best learners feel so-called self-driven. And they're not magically motivated, they're internally regulated. Teaching methods, tools, not religions. One of my favorite moments in the book is when it quietly ends the eternal education war: lecture versus active learning, technology versus books, group work versus solo work. Wrong question. The right question is, what cognitive job needs to be done right now? Surfacing misconceptions, discussion, prediction, debate, or maybe building mental models, guided explanation, practicing transfer, varied problems, monitoring understanding, reflection, and feedback. No method is universally good or bad, only misused. Asking is lecturing bad. Is like asking is a hammer bad. Depends what you're hitting. Assessment is not measurement, it is a feedback. The book is ruthless about testing culture because most tests it's about reward short-term recall, punish deep thinking, incentivize memorization, mislead teachers about understanding, and relearning needs formative assessment, low stakes, frequent diagnostic assessment that answers to the questions like what do you think is happening, why, where does it break, how confident are you. Grades don't do this because at the end of the day teachers and all themselves not perfect, and they can, for example, give low grade to the student if he or she gonna be perfect like in terms of answer, but because they don't like his or her personality they just giving low grade. In other words, the grades themselves most of the time not objective, they subjective, because let's say there are 10 teachers, and guess what, 10 of them gonna give 10 different grades. So it's better to go deeply and ask that kind of questions. What do you think is happening? Why? Where does it break? How confident are you? And it's even better if you develop your own internal so-called grade, let's call it, but it's way more like a deeper and objective. Okay, so we talk about feedbacks, right? And yeah, this make education harder to scale. Reality usually does. Okay, what about intelligence? That intelligence is not fixed, but beliefs about it are lethal. Before Carol Dweck turned growth mindset into posters, this book was already showing the mechanism. Learners who believe intelligence is fixed avoid challenge, hide confusion, give up early. Yeah, because most people, I guess it's proper to call them closed-minded or stupid. They stop to learn new things, develop their skills, and they just very biased and thinking very in a limited way. But that's good news for the people who develop themselves. Learners who believe it's malleable, they opposite. They persist longer, tolerate errors because they understand that mistakes just provide another information that it's direction wrong, and you understand that you gotta do next time something different, and they improve faster, not because they're nicer people, because their mental risk calculation is different. Teaching that ignores this belief system quietly sabotages itself. The uncomfortable conclusion. This book does not offer, a magic system. It offers something more annoying, like constraints. It tells you what a learning cannot be. Passive, context-free, memory only, feedbacks less. and what it must include things like prior knowledge, conceptual structure, deliberate practice, reflection. In other words, not just theoretical learning but experiential learning, because at the end of the day, whatever information you're getting, you have to actually test it. Like, for example, even let's take the history, right? The teacher usually, the proper ideal way how, for example, history should be taught in a way when teacher gives you information and you have to decide, like whatever, like some event happened in 16th century or something, was that good for your country or not? You have to decide that for yourself. But instead of that, what we're getting from the teachers, which we can say that it's like the part of the brainwashing system, that most of the time they're not just giving you information to make your own conclusion, but they teaching you how you should approach this information. They teaching you like this event in 19th century was bad, and most people don't even question why it's bad. So whether you're teaching kids, training employees, or maybe selling ideas or learning for yourself, the rules do not change. The brain does not care about your curriculum. It cares about coherence. Ignore that and learning becomes theater. Respect it and learning becomes durable. That's the real message of how people learn. Not inspirational, not trendy, just uncomfortably true. Alright, I hope this shit isn't interesting for you. So, I got another book which is kind of about like a brain learning, like neuroscientist. Some neuroscientist, I guess, was writing this book. Okay, like some random chapter. I guess it's gonna be interesting with the title like the brain, neuroeconomics and the science of iconoclasm. I don't actually know what the fuck is iconoclasm. Let me fucking Google this shit. Iconoclasm meaning. Okay, iconoclasm means actively challenging, attacking, or breaking acceptable beliefs, traditions, symbols, or authorities. Basically saying this sacred thing everyone respects. Yeah, I don't buy it. Kind of like critical thinking, I guess. Okay, in other words, iconoclasm, it's like challenging like a default belief, some kind of. Okay. Okay, let's read, and after, like during the reading, I will give my beautiful comments about it. You may wonder what the brain has to do with iconoclasts. Indeed, until a few years ago, I really wouldn't have given any thought to an iconoclastic brain either. As a neuroscientist, that's author telling, it's not me. I have spent the last decade studying which parts of the human brain responded to reward and were responsible for motivation. During this period of time, a revolution had occurred in the way that like a scientist thought about the biological basis of reward and pleasure. This revolution swept away the idea that there was a pleasure center in the brain that somehow acted as an accelerator to the engine of human behavior. The picture of reward and motivation that emerged from this revolution was like sophisticated mix of computational algorithms and pharmacology. It was a picture in which chemicals like dopamine shuttled between neurons in ways that looked remarkably like the calculations that modern robots perform. And unlike the antiquated Freudian notion of the idea driving human behavior, we now know that the decision that humans make can be traced to the firing patterns of neurons in specific parts of the brain. These discoveries gave birth to the field known as neuroeconomics. Running as a research laboratory to make these discoveries, however, is a job unto itself. Okay, blah blah blah, I want to get something practical. Okay, what about this? From visual imagery to imagination. The brain's reliance on distributed processing goes well beyond simple fail-safe features that prevent you from forgetting your grandmother. That's a good information, actually. Yeah. Distributed processing means that the brain can also construct images when information is coming from the eyes. In other words, like some sort of like a facial recognition system of the brain. This is a process called mental imagery, and it has a close relationship to imagination. In other words, our visual, like eyes, related with imagination. Okay. So in other words, even like let's say if we're closing our eyes, we using our eyes, but in this imagination way. Okay, the link between perception, imagery, and imagination has been debated for decades, but only in the last decade has like neuroscience revealed where imagination comes from in the brain. The old view of these like a functions was that visual perception was a one-way street toward the frontal cortex, where the heavy lifting of like imagination and cognition was performed. And recent experiments, however, have shown the visual cortex and its immediate neighbors in the parietal and temporal lobes play integral roles in mental imagery. Sounds bunch of like academic words. What about practical tips? Well, okay, let's try to find something practical, not just like theoretical shit. Okay, what about this title? Bertrand, I guess someone's name. The Iconoclast engineer who sees differently. You need a different approach to rocketry. You need someone who can approach the design from a different perspective and see rockets differently than NASA. His name is Bert Rutan. Rutan has revolutionized the aerospace industry more than any other person. For 40 years, Rutan has known that the key to more efficient aircraft and ultimately spacecraft through materials learning. Build them strong but light, and you can do a lot. This is a very different perception of the a NASA problem, or the problem that NASA struggled with for decades. Okay, it seems like actually the better way gonna be to ask our cute GPT to make some sort of conclusion, because the thing with the books that in some cases it makes sense to read all things and connect the dots by yourself, but the good thing about AI, I guess, that it helps you to do such things in a very short time. So right now, what I will do is to ask GPT to give me a podcast, but about this book, Iconoclast. So, alright. By the way, how often are you using AI? Or are you reading and learning things in old school way? Let me know in comments. So, okay. Now about this book podcast. Okay. Here we go. So, again, for the context, that book will name Iconoclast, the neuroscientist reveals how to think differently. Okay, let's kill the romantic myth immediately. An iconoclast is not a rebel with cool hair, not a contrarian for sport, not someone who just disagrees louder than others. According to Berns, an iconoclast is someone who does what everyone else's brain says cannot be done. Not because they're brave, but because their brain processes reality differently. And that difference has a cost. That's the core tension of this book. Iconoclasm creates progress and pain, innovation and isolation, breakthroughs and broken careers. The book doesn't flatter you. It explains why most people will never be iconoclasts, even if they desperately want to be. So again, for the context, iconoclasm, it's when people challenging default beliefs, that kind of things. The brain is inefficient. The brain is efficient. Iconoclasm is not. And here's Berns' foundational insult to humanity. The brain is lazy, which is not a surprise, but okay. Not stupid, not broken, efficient. Your brain runs on about energy, the energy of a dim light bulb. That's it. No extra wattage when things get complex. So it survives by doing what evolution trained it to do. Reuse patterns, trust familiar categories, copy what others believe, avoid uncertainty. That's actually a good explanation that the brain got its own limits, energy, and again, to save your time and energy and your ass brain, most of the time running on autopilot. It is constantly want to choose secure option, and in one hand that's like a good information, but in another hand, it is easy to stuck in some like a comfort zone, and again it's like you gotta keep the balance, and also at the same time you have to every day challenge yourself with the new things, because otherwise you're gonna be less adaptable to the new environment. And again, this is in other words, being lazy motherfucker, this is fantastic for survival but terrible for originality. And iconoclasm by definition burns energy. It forces the brain to reject shortcuts, tolerate ambiguity, override social cues, risk being wrong in public. Most brains do not volunteer for that. That's why thinking differently feels exhausting, because it literally is. It is literally takes more energy from your brain. And iconoclasts do not see more, they see else. Berns' first major circuit is perception. And here's the subtle but brutal point. Iconoclasts do not necessarily have better eyes. They have less obedient perception. In other words, for this kind of people, they just less respect to the authority, and they just want to question and decide for themselves. Perception is not a vision. Vision is data. Perception is interpretation. That's actually a good fucking point. Perception is not vision. Vision is data. Perception is interpretation, because we can show the same, visually the same shit to the 10 people, but we will get 10 different perceptions. Some person will say, oh, this is terrible. Other person will say, oh, that's amazing. And your brain constantly guesses what is it's seeing based on past experience, probability, social agreement. It feels in blind spots. It invents shapes. It prefers the familiar. That's why you see the triangle that isn't there. That's why experts miss anomalies. That's why the entire industries ignore obvious signals, and until it's too late. And iconoclasts are people whose perception doesn't lock in as quickly. They notice things like noise others discard, asymmetry others hate, and anomalies others smooth over. And not because they, try harder, but because they delay categorization. And that delay is dangerous. Dale Chihuliai, I guess it's another author's name. And the price of seeing wrong. Berns opens with a brutal case. Dale Chihuliai, the glass artist. Glass making worships symmetry. Centuries of tradition say symmetry equals mastery. but Chihuahua lost vision in one eye. And suddenly, not metaphorically, like literally, symmetry started making sense to him. He began producing asymmetrical glass forms. The glass world thought they were mistakes. He thought they were beautiful. He's the key insight. Berns slips in quietly. A physical change forced a perceptual rebellion. And most iconoclasts do not lose an eye, but many experience something equivalent. Displacement, failure, outsider status, unfamiliar environment. Anything that breaks like perceptual autopilot. In other words, when the pattern is broken, it is like when people constantly doing the same shit and one day something change and they like, what the fuck, they can't. It is hard to adapt to the new situation. Seeing differently is often not chosen, it is imposed. Fear is not weakness, it is circuitry. Now the second circuit, fear. This is where most people fall out the race, and fear in Berns' model is not about danger. It is about uncertainty plus social exposure. Two dominant fears kill iconoclasm. The first one, fear of the unknown. The second one, fear of like a public ridicule. And here's the killer. Your brain processes social rejection using the same circuits as physical pain. Yeah, that's actually another good point. When, especially like if you're very sensitive, somehow like people's rejection, like I don't know, if you, for example, working in sales, and especially at the beginning, if you're getting rejection, of course it depends on the personality, but some people really getting this like a no rejection as a physical pain is like, I don't know, someone slapping or choking them, which is like objectively it's just like sounds, voices, but people's perception make it worse and like literally like a physical pain. And being laughed at doesn't feel being laughed at doesn't feel metaphorical. It feels real because it is. And iconoclasts are not fearless. They just don't let fear veto action. In other words, they got, of course, they feel fear, but they do not let fear to overweight questioning, like critical thinking, which is a good thing. And that does not mean willpower. It means their fear signals do not dominate decision making. But most people feel doubt and stop. Iconoclasts feel doubt and move anyway. That's I guess the definition of courage, when even though you're scared, you do what you have to do. Same emotion, but different outcome. And Howard, it's another title, Howard Armstrong, right? Ruined alone. The most haunting story in the book is Edwin Howard Armstrong, inventor of like FM radio. Everyone said FM was impossible. A respected mathematician proved, quote unquote, proved it could not outperform AM. But Armstrong ignored consensus, built it anyway. It demonstrated clarity no one had ever heard, and then the system crushed him. RCA built their technology to protect investments, legal battles dragged on, friends turned adversaries. Armstrong was right. Historically, technically, objectively, he also lost everything, including his life. And this is Berns at his most honest. Being right does not guarantee survival. Iconoclasm without social intelligence is suicide. The third circuit, social intelligence, the missing one. This is where romantic rebels fail. And Berns' third circuit is social cognition, the ability to sell an idea without triggering rejection. Iconoclasts must do things like read group dynamics, pace novelty, frame ideas inside familiar language. Like you gotta know the context, in which way, it is better to pitch something, and know when to push and when to pause. Armstrong couldn't, others could. And this is the difference between being a genius in isolation and changing the world. In other words, it is like a one thing. The idea is it is like a one thing when you questioning things, but it is different things when you're not just questioning and judging others, but you're also showing your own point of view, your own a solution for some problem, and most importantly, you find a way to convince others. And for example, in business, to sell whatever shit you want to sell. Again, it needs also marketing expertise, social skills. And an idea doesn't win by being true, it wins by being accepted. And acceptance is neurological. You can ask why groups hate iconoclasts and need them. And here's the organizational paradox. Berns lays bare groups could do things like depend on conformity to function, depend on iconoclasts to evolve. But the same circuits that create cohesion punish deviation. So organizations have to do things like praise innovation verbally, suppress it neurologically. They say think outside of the box, and then punish anyone who does. In other words, it's it is inconsistency. If you say that you respecting creative outside of the box thinking, you at least let people to express themselves. It doesn't mean that their idea is great, but they should be able in your team to say and practically test their own ideas. Otherwise, what's the point? And that's not hypocrisy, that's biology. Understanding this lets you protect iconoclasts, deploy them strategically, or survive as one. Iconoclasm is not a personality, it is a process. One of the most useful reframes in the book that iconoclasm isn't who you are, it's what your brain does under a certain conditions. Perception can be trained, fear can be regulated, social intelligence can be learned, but none of it is comfortable. And if you're waiting to feel confident before thinking differently, you won't. Iconoclasts act while uncertain, not after certainty arrives. So in other words, at the end of the day, you have to teach yourself to be okay when it's not okay. So the quiet takeaway, known like a slogans, that this book is not motivational, it's diagnostic. It explains things like why originality feels lonely. In other words, it teaches you that internal motivation is the most important thing. When you're able to keep going, even though people around you do not praise you, do not complimenting to your ideas. And it doesn't mean that you don't have to consider it. You just getting feedback, fixing, and repeat. It also explains why good ideas get rejected, why being right is not enough, why courage without social skill fails, and most importantly, why your brain keeps dragging you back to the familiar even when the familiar is wrong. And iconoclasts are not heroes. They are neurological outliers navigating systems that evolved to resist them. And some change history, some get crushed, many do both. That's not inspiration, that's reality. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I hope it was interesting for you. Let me know in comments and see you next time.